So for me, knowledge management is about how do you get the right information you need to solve the problem in front of you. And as a knowledge management employee, my job is to help other people get the information they need to deal with the problems that they have. You know, it's fascinating. In graduate school, if you had asked me what I was going to be doing for a living, I would never have said knowledge management. I would have said, what is that? And to be honest, everybody still asks that question. I joined CARE as a fundraiser, and for the first several months at my job was just frustrated that I couldn't find the things that I was looking for. I needed information about our projects and what was working and what wasn't. And you had to email somebody who would email somebody who would email somebody who would put you on a phone call, and then you would have a meeting, and then maybe you would get the thing that you needed, and by then maybe your deadline had already passed. And we had a SharePoint system that was kicking around, but nobody was really using because nobody really understood it. So I checked out SharePoint for Dummies from the DC Public Library, and all of a sudden I was a knowledge manager. Because suddenly I said, hey, wait, I can figure out how to make that system work. Why don't you just send me the information and I'll make sure it gets in there? Which was maybe a mistake. Fair warning, once you volunteer for something, it then becomes your problem. One of my bosses is a fan of this term, the squeaky wheel gets the grease gun. It's good. If you complained, fix it, which is great. But it was that, how do I do my job well? I can't do that if I can't access the wealth of knowledge that's happening in this organization. And all of a sudden, that became my problem. I work on a couple of different buckets of stuff. So one is sort of classic information management. What goes onto the SharePoint site? Do we have the right documents? Are they tagged the right way? And that is sort of the grease that keeps knowledge management going. That's only a tiny piece of what has to happen with knowledge management. Another big body of work I do is taking that documentation and actually trying to digest it and figure out, if there's a 300-page research evaluation, what are the 10 things in here that the guy in Mali needs to know? And what are the 10 things in here that the guy at headquarters needs to know? That might not be the same 10 set of things. And what are the 10 things in here that the donor needs to know about? And how can I make sure that those people are getting that information? So it's moving past just storing documents to really trying to lift out what is the most important piece and figure out who's the audience. So there's a whole piece around that kind of synthesizing, digesting. How does this connect to, if this is a piece of research that came out of Mali, how does it connect to the work we're doing in Bangladesh? Does it? Sometimes not, but sometimes it does in ways that nobody was thinking about. So that's one piece. Another piece is more on the kind of communications end of things, making sure that stuff is getting written in ways that other people can read, is getting sent to donors, is getting featured in case studies or in communities like TOPS where other people could learn from it. So it's not just we sit on it, but that we're actually sharing with the broader community. I switched a couple of years ago from being on our gender team to being on our food team. And if you are a USAID implementing partner, which CARE is, and food is part of the work that you're doing, TOPS is a name that comes up. It is a place where somebody says, hey, if you haven't heard about this yet, here is a place where you might go find information that will help you. So it's not just about learning from our own information, but learning from other people's. So that's how I sort of first started working with it. And to be honest, how I shifted from that to the task force is a question I couldn't even answer for you. Knowledge management is such an integral part of what TOPS is doing. That, you know, once you get involved with it and you start saying things like, hey, I have a question about this, or I have a suggestion, all of a sudden you're a part of the task force, which is great. Having that kind of a dynamic is actually, I think, really helpful to the community. About a year ago now, there was a meeting around knowledge management and M&E, and how do those two pieces fit together? And that's one of the places I've been very involved with TOPS, because those are, in some ways, if you're thinking about it very crudely, M&E is about producing information and knowledge management is about consuming and sharing information. But we often don't talk to each other at all. So sort of sitting in a room with a whole bunch of people and thinking, hey, that is not the direction I was coming at this problem from, but it's a really interesting way to think about it. And that's one of the things I really love about TOPS is it's very interdisciplinary, and so it helps me think about problems in ways that I would never have thought of if I'd done it all by myself. The sustainability study that the working group circulated that Tufts conducted is one that we use all the time and was really thought-provoking for us as an organization and sort of crystallized a lot of things that we hope to do and want to do, but having a donor say, now you have to, helps us make the case to do it more systematically. So we really use that one a lot. And then in terms of knowledge management, any of the webinars that Stan Garfield has done have been hugely helpful to me, and I keep quoting them to people in my organization all the time. This is another piece that I would never have expected if you'd asked me about it before I started doing knowledge management. NASA is my favorite place to go for knowledge management tips, because they are the geekiest, most scientific, most technically minded people in the world, and they say this is not about the technology. This is about getting people to do it. And if NASA thinks that, then they probably are correct. If they couldn't build a widget that would fix it, probably no one can. So they have some really interesting thinking about how do you move beyond technology as a space. So that's one of my favorites. Like I said, all of the stuff by Stan Garfield has been really, really helpful to me. And there's some interesting pieces of work coming out of places like Harvard around how to produce research that is usable instead of producing pure academic research. So those are, the Kennedy School does a series on that I also follow. A couple of years ago, the chief knowledge officer for NASA came and gave a talk at the World Bank as part of KM World that week in DC that people talk about it. And Congress mandated that NASA do this because they said, when NASA gets knowledge management wrong, things explode on national news. Very, very publicly. When they do it wrong, everybody knows, and we have to fix that. And the fact of the matter is, lives are at stake when we do knowledge management wrong too. It's just quieter. It's less obvious. It's people who aren't on national news. And I don't think anybody has ever crystallized it that way for the development community before. And hearing him say that was just such a striking moment of, we are playing with people's lives around here, and we have to do that as efficiently and as effectively as we can. They also have some really interesting thoughts about an organization that's incredibly complex, very siloed, extremely sort of disconnected in some ways. So you think about the Mars rover crashed because one team was using metric and one team was using standard measurements. That's the kind of problem that in hindsight everybody gets, but you can also see how it happened. So they're dealing with problems that are as complex and difficult as the ones that we work with. So anytime they can make an advance on that, I find that that helps us. And one of the things I hear all the time is people say, look, I can either do knowledge management or I can do real work, right? We have this many people to feed, we have this many vaccinations to try to distribute. I can either do knowledge management or I can do that. And helping people understand that knowledge management makes that better and faster and easier and more effective is really where you have to be. That's the other thing NASA says that I found to be hugely helpful is think of yourself as a customer service provider and not as a manager. Knowledge management is the wrong term. It's about knowledge services. You are fixing their problems. You are not pushing your solution onto them. And that really reframed the way I think about what I do every day. So this is only from my perspective. One of the things I notice is a lot of times knowledge management, and when people first start saying knowledge management, what they really mean is information management. They are really thinking about the library sciences end of things. And that's important, and that needs to happen. It's a sort of necessary but insufficient condition to get to knowledge management. And one of the things I always get pushback, I've been a knowledge manager in a couple of different roles now, and for the first 6 months, people say, why are you doing communications? We hired you to do knowledge management. Why are you spending time writing and condensing and synthesizing? And it's moving beyond that, just posting things and managing the platforms into the behavior change. And that's something that I think we should be learning from our development colleagues and the people who are doing the quote unquote real work on the ground. If you can get a man to change the way he treats his wife, that is a huge behavior change, something that's really ingrained. And that's actually exactly the set of things we're dealing with when you're trying to get an employee to change the way they share information. So learning from those behavior change spaces, I think, is going to be really critical. I think it's also going to have to spread beyond just having 1 or 2 knowledge managers in each organization. I think it's going to have to be, there is a knowledge manager or coordinator, but everybody else has pieces of knowledge management written into their job descriptions and their performance objectives. I think one thing for me that's been hugely helpful is finding buddies, finding other people both inside my own organization and outside my organization who are dealing with similar kinds of problems and asking them, hey, how do you solve this? And one of the pieces to me that's hugely helpful that I try to do more regularly, I have a lot of friends who don't work in development, who work in tech fields or who work in the government or who work in other places, work in small business startups. Learning from other disciplines, I think, is really important, and I think it's something we don't do often enough. So NASA, for example, is not anybody I would ever have said, where do you go to learn about how to do international development? But it turns out they've taught me a bunch of really important things. So thinking about how do we keep injecting those conversations into the platform, and how do we keep not just talking to ourselves, but drawing from what's happening in other parts of the world and understanding that that's going to need to be adapted, right? So a big for-profit company that has a lot of money is going to be able to handle a problem differently than we can, but it doesn't mean we can't learn something from the way they're doing it.